Hopefully people, I had to do a new link, so. Greetings, welcome to Terra Prime Live. This is our show on Form 3, Soresu, the defensive form. So with us on the panel today is our special guest, Buff, how do you pronounce your name? Hairs?
Yes. Yes, my dad was Danish.
All right. Welcome, Buff. She is from Ludo Sports, U.S. North America, in Hawaii as
Hawaii.
well. So there you go. Welcome to the program. We've also got our friend Ben Judkins joining us, Jared Miracle, and our friends from Gulf Coast Sabres, Anna and Deso. So how's everybody doing?
Doing well, doing well.
How about you?
All right, not bad, not bad. Okay, so perhaps before we get into specifically about you, Buff, we'll just kind of go over a little bit what the topic is before we're going, because it'll lead in here. Again, we're talking about Soresu, the form. Most of us in the Star Wars lightsaber milieu, as it were, are familiar with this form. It's the form of Obi-Wan. It's the defensive form. In canon, it says that it is entirely defense. There's no offense whatsoever, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how it's portrayed or permeated in the video games or the role-playing games specifically. Unfortunately, John Solomon is not here today to help us with that stuff. But because I know it figures into game mechanics a whole lot. But we're not going to talk about any of that. We're going to talk about exactly what is useful about this idea, what exactly the idea is, how we're all interpreting it, because it's an idea or a component of sword play or fencing or whatever you want to call it that is very open-ended, very very diverse. We'll say that. So I guess to start out, let me start out with you, Buff. So you're with Ludo Sport there in Hawaii, right? And you're from a martial background as well. What's your martial background so that the viewers know?
I started with Shaolin, White Crane, Cholifat, Hungar, Tiger style, different weapons. Now I've been very, very fortunate to have studied under Sigung Taki Kimura, Sigung Richard Bustillo, Guru Dan Inosanto, and Sifu Tim Tackett. So they're all the first generation after Bruce Lee. So I've been very, very fortunate, especially as a woman, to have trained with them. And that helps my body move in all of the different forms of lightsabers. And that's why I got involved in lightsabers, because to me it was another martial art form.
Awesome. Yep. Well, you've definitely found kindred spirits here. Now in Ludo Sport, how is Form 3 Soresu approached? What makes it that in that system?
Well, you can find all of this on the Facebook pages of different Ludo sports around the world. I noticed that your Form 3 is orbit, like the paradigm is an orbit. In Ludo Sport, it's more of a spiral. So there's still turns. And in the videos that I was sent, I saw some of the footwork, and some of the footwork is similar also. So basically it's a spiral. And you said that for all of you, it's defensive. It is not defensive to me, the way I do Form 3. Basically, the way I do Form 3, it's a trap. I will lure you into my spiral, and then I will kill you.
So is it like a spiraling inward, like a kind of like you might call it a drilling in, sort of a set of a tactic or a set of movements?
It can be that way. It can go from circling into spiraling, and you can see this on all the Facebooks from the different Ludo sports. You can watch Form 3 people do that movement.
Yeah, yeah. But not imagined as a purely defensive thing by any.
I never use it for defense.
Mm.
I always use it for offense.
Mm.
But that's just me with a martial arts background. Other people may see it in a different way.
Well, that's one. Yeah,
Go ahead.
that is one thing that we talk about a lot here, is that idea of Soresu being completely defensive. To anybody who's done any type of weapon work, any type of sword work or whatever, the idea is absurd. You can't be defensive all the time. It's not, you will die. You don't even have to be going up against anybody good, right? If you keep defending, sooner or later, you're going to miss, they're going to hit you. And with a lightsaber, it's a kind of zero-sum game. So that's a really good point. Coming from a martial background, you hear this, it's completely defense, and immediately you're like, what? So it's a fantasy thing, right? So what we've done with us is we've just kind of compiled all of our kind of defensive strategies into it, that we focus on here. But the Form 3 and Form 4 in our system are very, very tied together. Like, they don't really separate, right? So you have to have, both of them. But yeah, that's a good point coming from a martial background.
Yeah, you can't keep defending. If you keep defending, you're weak.
Right. Well, and I wouldn't necessarily say weak as much as stupid. Because
weak / stupid.
Yeah, right. Because, oh my gosh, yeah, I mean, there's okay, so everybody's seen coaching equipment for fencing. It's all very padded, right? Because coaches have to get hit, right? They have to get hit a lot, right? So there's that there. But yeah, so navigating that whole thing there. But I will say this, it does align with a kind of non-martial artist idea of what martial arts entail, right? We were talking about Tai Chi before the beginning, and that's a martial art which is often portrayed as being completely defensive, and you never attack, you never do anything like that. And again, it's like, what are you what exactly are you doing then? It's like saying, I practice tennis so that I never play the game. Anyway.
Different people have different interpretations.
Yes. When you're trying to make things real, though, there is a reality that has to go, because even if, like I said, with a lightsaber, even if you're just kind of wildly swinging it around, sooner or later you'll hit somebody, right?
Well, I mean, that's a really good point. So Anthony would have us do, kind of Soresu exercises where we're practicing on pulling parries out of orbits, right? And we're not supposed to be focusing on hitting our opponent in this purely classroom exercise situation. We're only supposed to be understanding how orbits can turn into parries at different spots, right? I'm sorry, you cannot do that many orbits and not bonk someone. It is physics. It is superpositions. You cannot have two objects in the same spot at the same time. You're going to hit somebody.
Yep. And Newtonian physics takes over. One of your weapons is going to have more inertia, and that one's going to win. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Now, do you have in TPLA? Do you have a point system? I didn't really get that much information about that.
We don't have like a ranking system as such, but our system is progressive. So as people work through the material, they move on to different forms, right?
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. When you're sparring, do you have a point system?
Oh, a point system.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. we use a couple of different rule sets. The one that we're using right now a whole lot is the one that, or our version of the one that was popular, that got accepted by the FFE in France. And one of our people has been working with them along, for a while. So that's our, our set right now. That's the rule set we kind of do right now. And it's really nice for these types of forms because it's based on a system of priority. So you have to move the weapon behind you before bringing it forward, or the tip or something like that, to gain priority. So this gives you a lot of freedom to do things that you would never do in a real confrontation, right? Like spin around, because as soon as you spin around, the other person needs to defend, right? So now you have all of these things like tornado kicks and spins and rolls and orbits and all that kind of stuff that you can then now include and really, really play with in the rule set. So we've been having a lot of fun in that way. Soresu is definitely one of those things because you can use those orbits in every way you can think of.
In the videos that I was sent, I saw that you can turn your back on your opponent. So that's something that's similar in what Ludosport does. You can circle and turn your back on an opponent. And that's something I don't know about TPLA that does not exist in the first two forms in Ludosport.
Oh, okay. So you don't turn around until the third form.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
So again, I was thinking that your influences were martial arts and Star Wars, but you're also influenced by the French Fencing Society. So those were your three main influences?
No, it actually would be the opposite. We are the ones who influenced the FFE.
Oh.
But we take things from all over. I mean, if we're talking about specifically Soresu, and a lot of the stuff philosophically that I've come up with in this sense is because, defensive and everything like that. I've taken a lot of stuff from stick, right? So using sticks rather than swords, even though the forms are all sword forms because we have a hilt and all that. But most of the ideas, like the orbits, like the footwork and all that kind of stuff, come from stick forms.
Is that Kali Eskrima Arnis?
No, it's all Chinese stuff. So
Okay.
of various different ones. We have one that's about as long as a pool cue, which is called a Bengar. We've got the eyebrow height one. We got, 10 foot long ones and all that kind of stuff. So
there's staffs. That when you're referring to stick, you're referring to more of a staff.
Staffs, spears, that kind of thing. And what I'm saying is the principles that I've taken for Soresu in our material are mostly from those weapons, right? Obviously, the form itself, the demonstration and how we fight with them, it's all sword. But I'm taking my cue from Yu Yo, who wrote Jianjing, the Sword Treatise, a book full of staff exercises.
Right. So for everyone out there who is not a martial arts historian, this is a man who wrote during the Ming Dynasty, and he wrote the quintessential book on training soldiers, military exercise training, which he called the Sword Manual. And you pick it up, and it's all a book about stick fighting. There are no swords.
No swords.
But it's all about stick fighting.
You need to send me that too, because I would love to read that. I've trained in staff before, and I also do Kali Eskrima Arnis from the Philippines with two sticks, stick and a knife, stick in hand, or both hands. You can use any of those. And that helps in dual daggers or dual lightsabers.
True.
So do you have something that you do with two lightsabers at one time?
We don't have anything formally set down yet. We don't have any tutorials on the double things. I have a couple of videos where I show people how to twirl them around themselves, do the sword flowers, but that's about it as far as the.
Buff, you'll have to visit New York State for that, because Anthony and I are both old Wing Chun guys. So that is our speciality, being Wing Chun guys. We can just like trade in our swords for lightsabers. But yeah,
I love it. Center line.
exactly. Then suddenly it looks a lot like Wing Chun. I got a question for you though, Jared, right?
Yep.
So, you have a very different background than the rest of us, right? So you're coming at this from a traditional Japanese sword background, right? When you think, the essence of defense, right? What does that look like with kind of your interpretation of the sword, right? Because it's probably not orbits. It's probably not orbiting and spinning with the katana, right?
Decidedly not.
Yeah.
It's a lot closer to counterpunching.
Even though I want to say this, Nick Gilliard claims that all of that Obi Annie garbage in the prequels is directly from Kendo.
Yeah. Nick Gilliard claims a lot of stuff.
Go ahead.
Well, and the best part is that Kendo has nothing to do with swords, but it is an interesting form of stick fighting. Yeah, it's always fun when especially in Japan, because we're allowed to use Shinken, to have a Kendo guy hold a real sword for the first time and then immediately drop it because he's never felt something like that before. I love Kendo. I trained Kendo for a number of years. Big fan. Just has nothing to do with swords. But no, when I think of defense, and this is going to vary by Ryuha, but generally speaking, I think of it in terms of counterpunching, where there's a saying in the Shinkage style that if your mind is active, your body is passive, and if your body is active, your mind is passive. That you should always be doing more or less the opposite of what your opponent thinks you're doing on the inside. Mm-hmm. So if you appear to be moving a lot, then you shouldn't be thinking and forming a plan because your body is active. But as soon as your opponent moves, instead of becoming reactive, you instead become passive and allow that action to occur, and then find a way to logically and reasonably respond. That's the notion being kind of like, at least from a philosophical standpoint, what you were saying earlier about a spiral that draws your opponent in. Similar concept, and it works in boxing too, or any other kind of fighting. If you can control the opponent's psychology and draw out some kind of movement that you can predict, well, then you've already won.
It's a trap.
It's a shadow. Or the great Toshi Naito, who used to train me, referred to it as being a ghost.
Excellent. That's an excellent way to put it.
Yeah, it's a common philosophy, I think, that you find a lot out there, especially with weapon, and blades. And I sort of, like, you hear the ideal put out there a whole lot of, your sword should never touch. You should always defend and attack in the same motion, yada, yada, yada. We all know that doesn't happen ideally, hardly at all. But if you are from a world where people are killing each other with these sharp weapons, that is definitely going to be foremost on your mind, right? I want this encounter over as quickly as possible, right? Because the longer it draws out there. So it's a very good way of looking at Soresu in that defensive, stance, rather than being active and passive.
But so many of those things can be adapted and interchanged, which is what is so wonderful about all of this, that you can add in what is your knowledge base to influence what you're doing with lightsabers.
Yep. And also,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that it really comes down to, like, so many of these movements, they're identical, whether you're defending yourself or whether you're attacking somebody, right? And so we have the saying, attack and defense is a matter of intent. What is this person intending to do at the particular time?
I mean, intent or sheer dumb luck, right? Because, the moon guards, right? When you come back with the moon guard, sure, it's a parry, that cuts right at someone's hand or wrist. Do you hit the hand or wrist? You'll never know until you try it and see how it lands, right? So it's a cut, it's a parry, it's the same thing. You know, it's kind of up to the other guy, whether that was an attack or a defense.
Yes, these definitions are definitely more ethereal and less concrete than I think most people would have us believe.
When you have do you have tournaments?
We will be as soon as COVID has put a lot on hold. So we'll be getting tournaments up and running pretty soon, hopefully.
But we had a big tournament at the New York State Fair last year. So yeah, we have tournaments sometimes.
Now, do you have judges or referees who know all the rules who
Yeah,
Good.
we had local martial arts teachers who, you know, we got up to speed so we could have neutrals who were not going to be from, you know, any particular school come in, right? Yeah, because, you know, there's that part too. Yeah. So, yeah.
So what is your, I'm trying to understand, what is your point system? I mean, you were talking about your weapon can go behind you and go a certain direction, but how do you actually make your points in a tournament?
Hit to the hand is 1 point, arm and leg 3 points, and then head and body is 5 points. And then it's a time limit of 3 minutes.
And first to 15, right?
First to 15 or most points at the end of 3 minutes.
Okay, that's fascinating. Every martial art has a different way of counting that. So you don't. I saw that you wear a lot of equipment.
Yeah.
Like face mask and everything. In Ludo Sport, all we have is gloves and the men wear cups. Those are the only 2 pieces of equipment.
Yes, I've had my share of discussions with Hugo and other people from Ludo Sport back when we were starting all of this. Yes, they gave us no end of grief for putting the helmets on.
Hugo was my Form 2 instructor.
Yeah.
I got him a shirt after Form 2 that said Makashi Guy, and I was in the first American class in 2016, and I was the only woman. So when I took Form 2 with Hugo and he was Makashi Guy, I was Makashi Girl because I was the only one. So we ended up with shirts. I made the shirts, and his was Makashi Guy and mine was Makashi Girl. They were purple, so they were almost technical shirts, but not quite.
Nice. Well, I mean, this is interesting, Craig, because now we can like begin to speak comparatively, because last week's show was on Form 2, was on Makashi, right? And so like maybe we can bring Deso and Anna into the conversation here, because again, Deso and Anna are at a fascinating point, right? Because we have one person who's actively working in Form 2, one who has moved on to Form 3. And you know, the amazing thing is you have to defend yourself in all of these forms, right? So, you know, there's defense in Sicho, there's defense in Makashi. But I mean, as you guys are looking at it, at your current level of training, as you're thinking about what's going on, you know, do you see differences in kind of the philosophy or the execution of defense between Forms 2 and Forms 3? As you know, you two watch each other train and talk about your training together?
After sitting and listening so much to everything that's been said, one, our background is we've had a little martial arts training, but we come from the unique position of watching, observing, and pushing ourselves, and then putting ourselves in a position of, we're really proud of our work, please critique us after so many years of work, and then improving from there. So we may not have like a lot of titles or backgrounds, but we still work very hard at what we do. I think the point of Soresu being considered defensive in a real world setting isn't supposed to be taken literally, that you are only ever defending. The idea is my focus at this moment is defense. I am thinking about what is around me and how I can protect me before moving out. And from a Makashi Soresu training point of view, I greatly enjoy how Makashi has taught me how to find an opening and take advantage of it while not leaving myself prone. Because I am a very aggressive forward moving person, and I've always had a problem protecting myself. So Makashi has become a great balance for me. When I watch Deso train with Soresu, I'm seeing how he's making sure that every area around him is a thing of awareness and something he knows he can cover. And it's like watching a dance. One person's style of dancing isn't necessarily better than someone else's, it's how are they using it. And it's the same with sabers. One form isn't necessarily going to be superior, how does the person use it effectively? If you want to use Soresu defensively, it's going to be defensive, or you can use it aggressively. It really depends on the person.
Following that is going to be hard, but going from a Soresu standpoint, going through the motions and the practices and the drills and everything for Soresu, and then coming back and performing the Dulan, the set of movements for Makashi, we see the differences just between us on how we move. One is a very direct, stiff at the target. The other tends to be a little more rounded, but still hitting the same points. And that little bit of difference in training spells volumes for what others could achieve.
That's true. It also depends on your body mechanics, because some people can move in one way and other people can't move in that way. And everyone has their own way of movement. So that's an individual thing.
I tell my students that all the time, how we perform, because our students, of course, do Form 1. I tell them all the time how he does it, where he's very fluid with his movements. Someone else who's first picking it up or has been doing it for years may translate it differently, or how I'm very straightforward. Either you're going to move or I'm going to move you with Form 1 is going to be very different than a person who might be a little more tentative with their steps. It really does depend on the individual and those movements, not just dealing with body type or anything, but how you decide to translate it to your particular needs with that form. So that's one of the things I enjoy about seeing him train and then him coming in and helping me. They do lend to each other, and it's one of the enjoyments of watching the progression.
Excellent.
Thank you. I hope that answered it.
Right. Yes. That's, that's the interesting thing too, is where we've mentioned this in the first one. We probably mentioned it in each one of them, but there's the way that the forms are laid out and what's said about them and stuff like that does kind of follow people's intuitive ideas of what martial arts are, how they evolve over time, and all of that kind of thing. It's not particularly accurate, but it's, that's where it is. So you were saying, so what is the content of the Form 3 of Soresu for you guys at Ludosport? Is it mostly footwork drills? Is it what are the components to it that make it what it is?
There's so many different components, and I saw some similarities and some differences from the videos that I was sent. I heard a lot about the orbits, but the drills, the Dulans, I believe, a lot of them were lateral. They were more lateral movements, but there were similarities in the footwork of the toes pointing in, the toes pointing out, the toes pointing in, the toes pointing out. Now, it's more of a spiral in Ludosport, and that helps you do the turns. The footwork like that helps you do the turns. I
Do you do the same kind of circle walking as Bagua, like that kind of Bagua style circle walk?
It is, and I love Bagua. Thank you for bringing that up. I love Bagua. A lot of similarities there too. There's
Yeah.
so many different influences in Ludosport. You can't just say there's one specific one. It's influenced by so many different things, and each form is, again, influenced by so many different things. But yeah, there are a lot of similarities in the footwork to Bagua. And I love Jared's explanation of the ghost. I'm going to think of that from now on, because basically my interpretation of Form 3 is it's a trap. I will look like I'm defending for a split second to suck you into my trap like I'm a spider, but then it will be all over and you won't know what hit you. So it's kind of a ghost thing too. But the
So-
footwork, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of this, this question, right? I know that you were doing Form 3 in Ludosport exactly the same time I was doing Form 3 in TPLA. And we both had the same experience of being so motion sick we thought we were going to die.
Yep.
Right? Which was something that we were talking about the last time we were able to get together is, oh my God, I think I'm going to die.
I threw up very easily, especially spinning. I got it from both my parents. It's a hereditary time bomb.
So one of the things I think we should mention here that to the viewers here is what we're talking about is an art called Bagua Song from China, and that's one of the main components of Soresu, of our Soresu too. It's mostly a Bagua Jian form that continues on. But anyway, Bagua does everything walking in a circle, right? And they do this stuff, and there are arguments on where it descended from, like what was the practice that began that, but there is a distinct advantage that you get while training that, and that's you've got a nerve that runs down the center of your head, right, and down your back, and that essentially helps your equilibrium and stuff like that. And when you're dizzy, that nerve is overstimulated. So by walking around in a circle, by learning all of these tricks of, like dancers do, when they learn the pirouettes and the spins that they have to go around many times without, and then like come out very graceful and not like a drunk person, so you do this over and over and over again, and it desensitizes that particular nerve there. Now, a lot of people say, well, I don't get dizzy very often, but if anybody's been hit in the face, you know that can change really quick, right? Boom, and you're like, wait, where am I? Huh? What? So it one of the reasons that it's in our Soresu is for that effect, right? So you don't get dizzy when you're moving around, which gives you more freedom of movement, which gives you more options to either remove yourself from the conflict or end the conflict, right?
So the basic model of your Form 3 is orbit. Is that correct?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. The orbits are a core bit of it, but it's more the movement of the saber through space and around yourself, and learning that, whereas the next one is more centered on the body and putting the body behind the weapon. So one is, I would say, Soresu is more weapon centered, and Ataru Form 4 is more body centered.
Like again, for people in the audience in Soresu, when you haven't done this, there is a lot of kind of feeling the momentum of the saber. And the reason that you're spinning is you're trying to accommodate the movement of the saber. The saber is good. Weapons are unforgiving, right? Weapons are physics. Weapons go where weapons go. And you have to move your body around this. This is not like boxing, right? And so we are listening to the saber, and we're putting ourselves in a position where we always have to be listening to it, and our body is reacting to it, which is why we're doing all the spinnings. We don't really think this is going to happen in a fight, but that's not the reason we're doing this. right? We are learning to like understand the momentum. Like, you know, what does momentum feel like with a weapon in motion? And how do you accommodate that very real physical reality of a weapon in motion?
Yeah, there's another practice in some kung fu of like slapping parts of your body as they're kind of going by. And I asked one of my instructors once, what is this for? And really what it's for is so that you can bring your hand to different parts of your body without having to look around. It's essentially a proprioceptive exercise, right? I'm coming here. So if somebody grabs me on my shoulder, I go immediately into a particular, you know, posture rather than just, you know, kind of just clawing for something, you know, or whatever.
It's an
And
cell memory.
yeah, so that comes into what we do with Soresu, which is, you know, moving the weapon around and getting the body, you know, getting yourself out of the way. So like the two things we took from Star Wars, which are probably the keys to this whole thing, are the circle of protection, circle of defense, and then we have basically the circle and the grid. So we have straight, we have circular, we have intersecting, we have parallel, we have all of this kind of stuff. So it takes on a very geometric kind of feel to it.
Now, is that in all of your forms, or does Form 1 have a specific geometric shape and Form 2 has a specific geometric shape, etc.?
No. This is basically just talking about you have a stick that you are holding by a handle, and here is how. This is where you can move it. This is how you can move it around, right? This is how I can get to, you know, whatever it is I'm doing, right? Whereas our previous form with Makashi, we assume there's one person, we have one opponent, right? We know where they are, they're right in front of us, and so we can kind of focus everything toward that target. Whereas Soresu doesn't assumes that people are getting behind you. You know, it may be skills that you use at the impetus of a confrontation, right? And then you don't use it anymore. But yeah, so I would say, yeah, the core of ours is that interaction between circles, between grids, between straight and curved, and knowing those interactions. You can pretty
Okay,
much.
but it's not specific towards the form, because it sounded like the way you were describing Form 2 was more linear.
Well, it is, because we are assuming a duel. We are based. All of those skills are skills that you bring to single combat, right? Our Shicho is based more on military forms and types of training. So that's also, you know, somewhat linear or whatever, but it's very forward going. There's not a lot of backing up or what have you. So there's a lot of pushing. So each of those forms, you know, has that. But with you, we always operate in 3-dimensional space. So all of our forms operate in 3-dimensional space. So we don't have any truly linear or whatever. We understand that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. But we also understand that sometimes that straight line is not the best way to get to someplace.
Sometimes that straight line is going to have a blade in the way, and you don't want to run into that blade.
Right.
It's been our experience with, you know, Makashi with TPLA. It is linear back and forth, but it's also lateral. You don't really learn a lot of lateral with the TPLA. Shicho is very straightforward. And then with the induction of the Soresu, you've got that the circular, the spiral, if you will. Yes, the bagua walking around your target is one of the main things. And yes, you get very dizzy. And yes, the part where you have the stick, you got to bring it behind your head, and you're also walking and spinning with it at the same time. It's all that spatial awareness One, so you can do it without hitting yourself, and two, so that you don't get dizzy, like what he was saying earlier. That's been my experience with it. So even when I come back to Shicho or Makashi, like I was saying, bringing those elements of Soresu into it brings a completely different flow of the same movements.
Yeah.
That was a really good explanation. And there were some definite similarities to Ludosport Form 3. And yeah, it's really easy to get dizzy.
Yes, dizziness is definitely one of those things.
I'm training someone in the footwork right now, and well, training 4 people in the footwork right now, and one of them couldn't do it anymore because of the dizziness factor. So they're working on spotting. They're working on getting better at spotting.
There you go. Unfortunately, I don't, with any kind of conditioning, especially neuromuscular conditioning, I don't think there's any way through it but through. You know, like that
Ginger.
What?
Ginger, eat ginger, it helps. When I go on a boat, I need to do that also. If you eat ginger, it helps with the dizziness. So before a Form 3 tournament, eat ginger.
All right. Let's see.
I want to bring Jared back into this discussion for a second.
Yes, let's do that.
Right? So again, Jared, you're listening to all of this, like, just, you know, East Asian insanity going on over here, right? Where again, you're on your island where you don't spin, right? As you listen to this, like, what are the, you know, I love the notion of the shadow. And again, you know, like the traditional Japanese sword arts work really well with Shicho. Most of our students are Shicho students, right? Like, as you're listening to this, like, what are like the psychological elements or the strategic elements that you're hearing about defense and Soresu that, you know, you think people could maybe take out and apply to their, you know, 2 hands on the blade, a little bit more linear, a little bit more katana-like, you know, stuff, which is what most TPLA students are at this point in time.
Well, yeah, and you know, I'm very much a Shicho guy. So fundamentals are fundamentals for a reason, and there's actually a really interesting debate going on in the jiu-jitsu community right now, both traditional and Brazilian, which is really judo, but that's another thing entirely. Why is it that if you watch grappling tournaments today, they look so radically different from grappling tournaments 25 years ago? And are people better now? Like if you took a champion judoka from 25 years ago and you had him compete with somebody today who is somewhere around that same caliber, is the more modern guy better? And my position is no. Actually, the modern guy is probably going to lose because he doesn't spend as much time drilling very basic, fundamental linear techniques. Because at the end of the day, that's your bread and butter. And it's important that we get into these higher level conceptual notions of, you know, why am I spinning? Why is a spiral valuable? Psychologically, how am I behaving differently in this form versus this form? But at the end of the day, you need to drill that most basic strike or it's not going to be there when you need it. So I guess I kind of think of it as an 80-20 rule thing. You need, you know, 20% of your activity is going to produce 80% of your return. So you should focus on that 20% very heavily. And so basics, which, you know, is sort of the Japanese mindset, is you have kata and you do kata for a reason. And once you learn that, then maybe eventually you move on to something more complicated. But there's also a saying in Buddhism, before enlightenment, I carried water and milked the ox. And after enlightenment, I carry water and milk the ox.
True.
That actually, your statement about maybe progressing on to something more complicated makes me think of something I tell my students all the time, which is if you're starting to hate it, you're probably just now starting to do it right. And because it's about repetition, and I tell people, I'm going to be honest with you, you're going to be in the same place for a long time because you'll think you progress and it's great. You understand the fundamentals. Now let's polish it and do it correctly. We got to get the mindset down and get you out of counting your steps and into this is where I live. Now I can perform it correctly. And that is a very fundamental statement. And I agree. While things may be flashy now, what is that phrase about fearing the man who did the same punch 1,000 times?
Mhm.
It's that same concept on just because it's not flashy doesn't mean it's not good. It's effective. It's efficient. And that's how I view it as well.
That's a great sentiment. That reminds me of that line from the Heart Sutra, the form is emptiness and emptiness is form. And the notion that they're trying to get at is you will never achieve your goal until you give up going for your goal and just fall in love with the mundane exercise.
Yeah. Because no matter how far you get, when you come back to the basics, if you don't find I remember this and I'm enjoying doing it, then you need to reconnect with that, because we should always be able to go back to where we started and feel something towards it and have learned something new every time we go back.
I was about to point out, getting a new understanding from a basic drill that you've done 1,000 times. Because sure, you progress, but now coming back to it, oh, that's why I do this stance. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
There's so much.
Life.
Yeah, to bring the Bruce Lee quote about the man who practiced one punch the whole, 1,000 times. I'll bring it back to Soresu, in that I think it was somebody asked, I think it was Jackie Chan, that quote is like, do you think that's true? And he responded with, did he learn any blocks? In that case, no, I don't fear him.
Well, I think the idea is,
No, I know. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Because for me, practicing Makashi and then having him, the balance between Soresu and Makashi that we're working on, I have never been good at blocking. You mentioning it, I have always been very aggressive, straightforward. Slowing down and having to do something that I've seen done faster and I did faster and being told, no, back up, slow down and try again. Now, when I actually put it into practice in different training exercises we do, I am now, without thinking, able to block because of going over it over and over again. And at the time, like I said, I'm going, oh my gosh, my shoulder is angry and I don't want to do this anymore. And those are the moments where it's, well, now you're going to do it for 5 more minutes. And you feel those benefits, but actually getting to see them play out makes all the difference in the world. Because I think, Chad, you've said before, when you were talking about the myths and truths of dueling and stuff, you were talking about the only way to learn how to do those things is to do them. And that is so accurate and true. And actually getting to see it in action makes all the difference in the world, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, we're talking about the debate over martial arts forms and whether or not, myths and stuff like that. And that was in response to people who think they can learn how to fight from learning a solo form, and for those who think that learning a solo form is going to ruin their fighting, right?
Yeah.
Both of these camps are so wrong, because your form, it's like saying, if I do 15 jumping jacks, I'm going to ruin my walking gait. It's like, it's an absurd idea, because the only way you get good at something is by doing something.
Yeah.
Right? You can shoot hoops all day long, right? You're not going to play in the NBA. You're not going to do well against Jordan or even at his age now, court with you. Right. So that's something that we want to keep in mind too. And simplicity as well, right? Basics, right? We talk about Shicho, and I always say that through our system, Shicho is the one constant, right? It's always a mistake that people end up like, getting ahead, and then they kind of let the old stuff drop off. I was the same way, and probably everybody who's learned martial arts done that at one point, right? And you learn, oh, okay, this is the important stuff.
Yeah.
Oh,
So, I
this
mean,
stuff.
again, this is a question. What does Sicho with a Soresu mind look like? And I think that Sicho changes as you approach every one of these forms, right? When someone starts off in Sicho and maybe they start to spar, you can tell that they just started off in Sicho and they started to spar because they do rope movements and they don't pay attention. It's terrible, right? And then what do you learn in Makashi? Well, you learn to pay attention to your opponent in geometry, right? But it's still very aggressive. And, what do you learn in Soresu? Well, you learn to pay attention to your weapon and how your weapon moves and all that momentum. And, when I think about who does Sicho with, Soresu mind, I think about Damon. I think about General Sun, right? Because, I've worked a lot of Sicho with him. I've worked Sicho with him in person, and I am amazed with how in tune he is with his blade. I mean, we saw that when we had him out at TPLA headquarters, that it was nothing for him to feel the momentum, and rather than just try to stop it and bring it back, just whip the sword around his head and keep going with it. And you're suddenly like, wait a second, this is someone who's really listening, to where that weapon is at and thinking about what can I do with it in space at this point, And so it kind of brings it to his form 5, right? His form 5 is kind of Sicho with Soresu mind. And, so again, I mean, even if you are just on Sicho and you are practicing the basics, or if you've gone all the way through and you're practicing your Sicho again, there are ideas here in form 5 that can really, take you back and inform what you're doing, right?
Form 3, right?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, form 3. Sorry, I jumped ahead of myself there. Had a couple of weeks because again, you're just like Deso was saying, your experience with Sicho should not be the same. Once you have gone through Soresu as it was to begin with, you're still going to be practicing Sicho, right? But hopefully there are things about this weapon that you will now understand that you didn't before. And, you can start looking for those things at any point along the pathway.
Yes. We have some chatter on the chat. That's getting a little heady. They're talking about drawn in darkness and all that kind of stuff. And I just said we just like hitting each other with glowing sticks.
That's how Ben pulled me into all this. He's like,
Exactly.
hey, you want to play plastic spaceman with laser swords? Yes, yeah. I do.
Yeah. Do you need to ask that question? And of course I do. It's like the answer. It's the same answer to the question of would you like to become an intergalactic bounty hunter? Of course, yes.
Okay.
All right. So as we are nearing the end here, do we have any final thoughts we want to put forth into the void about the defensive form, which we now know? And that's another thing too. I'll finish up here. Maybe it'll spark something. You're going to have different, every time you progress, you have a different view of where you just were. Right, like you follow a path up the mountain, your view changes as you get higher. Same thing, right? So your idea of aggressive action is going to change, right? Your ideas of defense and offense are going to change as you move forward. We like to think that these concepts are set in stone and that they're clear and we know what they are, but that's really the game of martial arts, is trying to navigate all these little mystery boxes, in a sea of chaos where anything can happen.
Chess game.
Yeah, or surfing, where you're not necessarily the thing that's making you go, right? You're riding the thing, right? And if you fight it, it won't work, right? I think that's true for a lot of things.
I really appreciate everyone's input. It's always good to broaden your mind to other people's ideas and opinions and concepts. And I really appreciate the input from everyone today. Very, very valuable to me, and I am very appreciative.
Well, we're very appreciative of you coming on the show, sharing your experiences with us. We have anybody else have anything to add before we?
I did want to say something about what Ben was talking about dealing with the general, because we actually discussed this today during training. We were talking about all of you. There was a question about TPLA and all the people involved, and this all leads together. We were talking about everyone's strengths and what stands out about them. And what Ben said about Damon and his work, we started talking about one of the things I tell people when I tell them they need to slow down and focus on their movement is to look at your blade work as a conversation. Every time you're moving, people may not see it if they're not trained, but those little stops in the orbit and then flowing through, I tell everyone to treat those as commas. You're talking to someone, showing them what you're doing, and there are little emphases in that sentence that you stopped and you held while training, but in a flowing motion, a trained eye can see each individual movement going together. In yoga, it's called a vinyasa, where it's continued motion. And I like that, where Deso can name off, like a lexicon, the different names of each movement that are linked together. But if you're just watching that flow, it looks like one movement. It's just the little thing. Ben mentioning that about Damon is something that we talk about in training too. And I just like how there's almost this universal mindset about things. Even if each of us aren't talking about it, we still have a similar view on things because it just all goes together. And I like that.
And Damon is very much the mindset where if he does a movement, it is like 6 movements for someone who is just learning, but to him, it's all one thing. It's all part of the same motion. And that's his conversation, but it's like speaking 100 miles an hour to somebody who's just learning how to talk. And that's where, because he doesn't speak in terms, he doesn't speak in this, he speaks in his emotion. And a lot of you do that as well when you get to see your training bits or you guys sparring together. So I think that's an important thing to bring up.
All right. Okay then. Well, thank you everybody for joining us here on the panel. Thank you, Buff, for joining us in from the islands. I miss it. I love.
Let me know when any of you are coming.
If there's an invitation. What island are you on?
I'm on Oahu, and I'm on the windward side. I look out of my windows and I see mountains and waterfalls and rainbows and not quite unicorns, but really close.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. All right. Well, thank you to Deso, Anna, Ben, Jared. Thank you to everybody out there for joining us on this program. We will be back next time with Ataru, the attacking form, or the aggression form. So we'll get to talk about, aggressivity and hitting things with power and strength. So yes, tune in for that for us next time. We'll see you. Thank you to Buff again for joining us here today. Thank you for all out there. Patience, practice, perseverance. Happy sabering.
Mahalo nui loa.